Wolfpack, what is going on? It's your boy, the Wolf of Roto Street. RotoStreetJournal.com, we breed and feed you fantasy wolves. Here with your Week 7 waiver wire, the most important time of the week to get those lineups improved and ready to roll. And it's an interesting one. I've heard a lot of people bashing this Week 7 waiver wire. Oh, there's nobody good out there. I think there's at least 3 to 4 real game changers, guys you can toss right into your lineups to start, and so many impressive stashes. So I think there's tons to dive into, and let's start at the top, as we always do, with quarterbacks. My only waiver wire quarterback guy that I want to focus on this week is Drake Maye. 3 touchdowns in addition to 3 turnovers, but what an impressive rookie debut. As a Pats fan, I was very, very excited to see this game. 243 yards, 3 touchdowns, did have those 2 picks, did have the fumble, was under pressure all day, does have a horrible supporting cast, and yet the dude still put up 22 fantasy points, depending on your scoring settings, was the QB10 in his debut against a solid Houston defense. Very impressive performance here. You saw everything that could make this guy, Drake Maye, a fantasy juggernaut. The cannon arm, the mobility. This guy had 1,585 rush yards and 16 touchdowns over his 30 collegiate games. And again, I know the surroundings aren't the best for a fertile, massive fantasy explosion, but when you have this type of skill set, it does remind me of the comparison he's drawn a lot, that early career Josh Allen, who had horrendous receivers around him and yet was still consistently churning out QB10, QB8 performances, largely on the legs alone. And he does have right now, Drake Maye, the highest scramble rate other than only Jaden Daniels. I know it's a small sample size. It's just one game, but 5 scrambles, 38 yards. That's right over Kyler Murray's rushing average. We all talk about Kyler Murray, this ultimate Konami cheat code upside. Drake Maye has the same exact juice rushing-wise. So very impressed with what I saw from his debut. And then you mix in the fact, if you need a signal caller this week, let's say you have Dak and you're just sick of him, or he's on bye anyways, Drake Maye gets the Jags. They are by far the best matchup for quarterbacks, whether you just want to go with standard fantasy points, 24 points per game, #1 allowed by a mile, or even more so, if you look at the schedule-adjusted fantasy points allowed by the Jags, quarterbacks score on average 10.4 fantasy points more than their typical output against the Jags. The next closest is plus 3.8. Yeah, that's how wide the gap is, and that's how bad this Jags defense has been against signal callers. In their last 4 games, Josh Allen put up 30 points. CJ Stroud put up 23.5. Joe Flacco put up 26.56. And Caleb Williams had 29.54. We're not talking about world beaters there with Caleb Williams, Joe Flacco. And they're still having massive days. Again, no quarterback has scored fewer than 23 points against this team across the last 4 games. And we just had Drake Maye finish as a top 10 quarterback in his first start ever. I love him to finish yet again as a top 10 quarterback. I have him ranked as such, +6 ECR for Week 7. Definitely love snagging him. If you have QB woes, you need a plug-in streamer this week. I think Drake Maye is a phenomenal stream and stash in leagues of all shapes and sizes. That's all of the quarterbacks I have for you, Wolfpack. If you do enjoy what you're hearing at any point, just a reminder, that thumbs up button really does help us get out to more people, especially early on. The heart button on Twitter, the likes, the shares, the retweets, that stuff so greatly helps us grow, and it's so appreciated. This is the show I put more effort into than any in the week, and I know it doesn't do quite the numbers of the sit starts, but any of your help helping this thing grow would be so greatly appreciated. You guys have been awesome all year. Now, I do want to turn our attention over to the running back position. We're going to have a couple different notes here. I'm just typing one in as we speak for one such guy. It's going to be different, and the rest of them we're going to kind of focus on a different category here. But let's dive into my #1 waiver wire pickup of the week is Tyrone Tracy, 45% rostered right now. I know in your league, probably not out there, but whether you have him picked up at this point or if he's somehow lingering, let's just talk about how good this kid has been. 14 and 20 fantasy points in his first 2 games as a starter. Running back 16 and running back 7 in that span. We're talking half PPR scoring. Week 5, we see the rushing goodness. 18 carries, 129 yards, 7.8 yards per pop. Really impressive on the ground. Almost half his carries going for 5+ more yards. A quarter of those carries going for 10+ more yards. 15 miles per hour or higher on well over half his carries. You saw all the explosiveness, the ability for this guy to be a true elite running back. And as you likely know, he's a converted wide receiver. To see that wiggle, to see that burst, to see him reading the holes as well as he did was impressive. Now, in week 6, we got far less rushing efficiency, just 50 yards on his 17 attempts, 3 yards a pop. But we saw that dual threat ability, that converted wide receiver, really playing into those old strengths. 6 targets, hauls in all 6 of them for another 57 yards, and did score his first NFL touchdown in week 6 here. Insane usage. 93% of the Giants' expected fantasy points, according to Fantasy Points data, went to Tyrone Tracy. He played 84% of the snaps. That was up from 62%. He ran 72% of the routes. That was up from 41%. And he logged nearly every single pass blocking snap, up from he had just 1 in the week before. He had all 5 of them. Only 1 went to Eric Gray. So just seeing the team trust him so much more volume being thrown onto his plate. And Art Stapleton, a very popular beat writer there for the Giants. Again, just speculation. We can't say, oh, Art Stapleton knows exactly what they're going to do, but he projects that they're going to give 70% of the work moving forward to Tyrone Tracy, just 30% to Devin Singletary. He feels like Singletary is going to be forced back into that Eric Gray role. Now, I don't know if I fully buy that. I know that Brian Daboll historically has loved him some. Devin Singletary, motor, they call him, even dating back to those Buffalo days. But when you just watch the efficiency, you watch the explosiveness, Daboll does respect his talent and gets his talent the ball as much as he possibly can. We saw him force-feeding again Tracy these past 2 weeks. I can't imagine that he just takes a backseat to an injured Devin Singletary right now. So I love Tyrone Tracy. If he is somehow out there in your leagues, I think this guy is worth I'd say 50% higher. Maybe if you need to just blow it all to try to get this guy, I would absolutely be looking to make sure I get him number 1 waiver wire claim, whatever it takes. I think Tyrone Tracy is well worth it. Now, when we look at the rest of the running backs on this list, it's not a great list of you can plug these guys right into your lineup, but tons of those stash upsides. With only 2 teams on bye this week, the Bears, the Cowboys, you might not have as many bye week fill-ins. You need to pick up a streamer. And so I really think this is a great week in week 7 waivers to prioritize those huge upside swings. The guys that if something breaks right for you in week 7, this guy on your bench is the one that everybody's bidding all of their FAAB to get. And we have plenty of those running backs, plus some handcuffed with benefits too. The ones you do like that, if you are in a pinch, you can plug them into your lineup. So when I go through the questions, it's kind of like, is this team serviceable? Maybe even good? Okay, want to check that off. Is this back about 200-ish pounds? Could he handle the future workload? Should the runner back in front of him go down for at least a week, for maybe a month, however long? Could this guy be the true back, or is there a lot of competition behind him and it might be a committee? We're looking for those guys that would likely see the majority of work in good offenses and could hold up to that work. And so the first guy on that list, you can already see his name here, is Tyler Algier. Only 30% rostered out there in 70% of leagues. This guy is an absolute beast, though. He goes for well over 100 yards, 105 yards on his 18 carries, scores as well, catches his only target for 3 yards. That doesn't add a whole lot for you, but did actually see more carries in this game than Bijan Robinson, played more snaps than Bijan Robinson, racks up 19.3 fantasy points, was a top 5 running back this past week, was Tyler Algier on that scoring. And Robinson himself had a great day, even more fantasy production, 95 yards, 2 scores, looked a bit better. It seems like he's fully over that hamstring injury. But again, this is a 50-50 split at this point. And so Algier, that's the handcuff of benefits right there. You can plug this guy into your flexes should you be desperate. But of course, if anything happened here to Bijan Robinson, we'd be ranking Tyler Algier probably in our top 3 running backs. That's how good this guy has been when he gets the volume. We saw it as a rookie. He went for over 1,000 yards and really didn't start the last 3 or 4 weeks of the season, was a top 3 running back for the fantasy playoffs his rookie year. This guy's a beast, one of the top graded pass protectors as well, so he could definitely handle that 3-down skill set. So Algier tops the list of handcuff stashes, but this one also comes with some benefits too. Now, if you miss on him, Ray Davis, we just saw Monday Night Football last night. Huge game to Ray. 23 touches, 3 of them being catches, and 152 yards from scrimmage. Does get vultured by Josh Allen, as does every running back in Buffalo, but still was able to put up well ahead of 15 fantasy points in half PPR settings there. Just on yardage alone, got to 17 points, was the running back, 14 for the week, and he had 91% of Buffalo's expected fantasy points given the high-value nature of his touches. 58% of the snaps, 46% of the routes, 13% of targets, 67% of carries, and again, 91% of the expected fantasy points going to Ray Davis in the absence, of course, of James Cook. Now, James Cook might be back as early as this week. It's kind of a surprise, honestly, that he didn't play in Monday's game. But what if this situation is getting worse? But with the practice, we've seen it happen with Christian McCaffrey injuries. You have no clue what's actually going on here, and it does look very clearly like Ray Davis would be the preferred guy should James Cook miss any more time. And if he's right back in the lineup, yeah, it's probably going to be tough to trust Ray Davis. But at least you have the clear-cut guy with Ty Johnson only seeing 4 carries, 8 of the routes, 0 targets going his way on just 24 of 68 snaps for Ty Johnson, a distant running back 2, if you even want to call him that. This was the Ray Davis show, and he looked great. Bowling ball, hitting the hole like he was shot out of a cannon. This is the guy that put up monster production in the SEC for 2 different schools across his years. I know he's older, but this man is an absolute bulldozer and one of the best stories to root for that you just love to hear about overcoming obstacles, homelessness. This guy is an absolute legend for what he's been able to do and overcome, and you love to have that type of stuff in your fantasy locker room, no doubt. Now, moving forward, Jalen Wright, he's one of the exceptions to the rule of, like, will he be a feature back if the starter goes down? Probably not. We know that's not how Mike McDaniel likes to use his backs. But remember last year, we had Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert finish in your top 4 running backs in points per game. And so this is one of the rare committees that I actually don't mind targeting. I will put the preface on it that until Tua comes back, there's not a whole ton of value here. Wouldn't really trust any of these guys in my starting lineup, but it does seem like Tua is trending towards maybe a week or 2, and he'll be back here. It's crazy. Prayers up, hope the guy's okay. But certainly for fantasy-wise, it makes all the difference for this offense. Now, we just had Devon Achane ahead of their bye. They were on bye this last week, but before that, suffered a pretty brutal concussion, and we don't know quite yet whether he'll be back in the lineup here in week 7 or not. He was, as of Monday, in the red non-contact jersey. He's out there, but also not practicing in full. And when he was gone, we had Jalen Wright in week 5 pace this team in rushing, 13 carries for 86 yards. Really impressive yards per pop there, 6.6, and just very explosive. We talked about this guy time and time again. Was my favorite preseason sleeper, given that he ran a 4.38 40, 98th percentile there. Freakish athleticism, 9.82 relative athletic score, was 37th among 1,900 running backs all time. Literally the 1 percentile athleticism. The first 5 yards of his 40-yard dash were actually faster than Devon Achane. So the acceleration is elite, and we saw it in college. 26% of his carries going 10-plus yards, 19 runs for 15-plus. He had over 1,000 yards on just 137 carries, which is crazy. 7.4 yards per pop. 4.53 of those yards coming after contact. And he looks really good at the NFL level. I mean, again, we've seen Achane being swallowed up, Mostert looking slower than usual. And it's like, it's Tyler Huntley, right? This whole team kind of stinks. The line's bad. But then Wright comes in and averages 6.6 yards per pop, is spinning, is breaking tackles, is breaking it down the ski. The guy just looks phenomenal. So eyeball test-wise, production-wise, analytics-wise, in terms of next gens like rush yards per success and all that good stuff, Wright is absolutely cooking here. And so if Achane's concussion lingers, if he suffers another injury, and especially once Tua comes back, I truly think Jalen Wright has that upside to do what Devon Achane did all of last year, should all the circumstances arise. Big if, but certainly worth a roster spot to wait and find out. So he is my number 3 running back stash that's out there in well over half of the leagues. Now, I also really, really like Kamani Vidal, his first NFL action coming this last week. And what does he do? He hauls in a 30-yard wheel route reception, catching a touchdown there in his first career snap, his first career touch. Very, very impressive stuff from him. And granted, it was the J.K. Dobbins show for the vast majority of this afternoon. 57 of the 78 snaps went to Dobbins, as did 18 of the 38 carries, or no, rather 25 of the 37 carries went to J.K. Dobbins. It was 18 of 38 routes as well. So Vidal really did play a minimal role here on his first debut, but he was well ahead of Hassan Haskin, even in this featured role for J.K. Dobbins, and he looked really solid. 4 carries, 11 yards, and again, 40 yards on his 2 catches. He caught both of those targets, including that touchdown, and we saw it in the preseason. Vidal's that short kind of MJD, thick, stout tackle breaker. He led all of NCAA last year in missed tackles forced, in yards after contact, in all of those important metrics. And he's a great pass catcher too. So he has that 3-down skill set. And to me, with Gus Edwards on IR and just looking like a complete slug, a bag of mulch at best is Gus Edwards. If something happens to J.K. Dobbins, and again, knock on wood, I love this comeback story, love how impressive he is looking. He's going to be a league winner should J.K. Dobbins stay healthy. But if he does not, and we know he struggled throughout his career with it, it's looking very clearly like Kamani Vidal is that next man up. And this is a team with a top 5 offensive line, number 8 right now in rush attempts per game at well over 30 after this last week. We know they want to run the ball. We know they can do it well. This Greg Roman scheme has always done that. And it's looking like Kamani Vidal is that next man up in this situation. So definitely check him out on your waiver wire. Just behind him in terms of stashes for me is Ty Chandler. Did have the bye this last week. And so it does, we don't know quite yet what is Aaron Jones' stats. He was labeled week to week with his groin injury, but a lot of people noting he seemed in good spirits after that game. Didn't seem like they were overly concerned. But we do know that Aaron Jones has a consistent history. And so, his only game last year with no Alexander Madison, 81% of the snaps. This team clearly trusts Ty Chandler to be their guy if they needed him to be. We saw all preseason the team raving, Ty Chandler's the man, their D lineman saying, I'd buy stock in Chandler if I could. Another guy with 4.38 speed that we know can rip the big play. And I get it. The vision's not great. Doesn't really break any tackles. I'm not a huge fan of the guy as a player, but I just look at it. The team clearly is, and I see a very solid offense, a team that with a starter who is great. I love Aaron Jones, but we do know has that track record of injuries here. It might be as early as this week. We might not see Jones play. You might already get your spot start here from Ty Chandler. So if you're needing a plug-in at running back, he brings a little more juice to the table as the potential starter this week, as does Jalen Wright in a way, if, of course, that Devon Acham injury continues to linger. Those guys are kind of in a tier above these remaining names as stashes, but I still think, again, in deeper leagues, if you have bench space, trash to cut, wide receiver 6, that's never going to sniff your lineup. A QB2, you don't need some of you guys carrying 2 defense. I've seen Baltimore, on all these rosters of a defense 2, and they're like, yeah, well, they've had these bad matchups, and I'm going to play them. And you look at their calendar, just like, when? And they're not even that good of a defense, right? So if you have that type of stuff lingering, cut them for one of these guys. The last 2 stashes I'll toss out there. Emmanuel Wilson, 12% rostered. He is consistently, though, getting onto the field, 30% of the snaps, 25% of the rushes. It has been clearly the Josh Jacobs show for the most part, but we are getting quality usage here from Emmanuel Wilson nonetheless. We know that this is a Matt LaFleur staple. He has always had committee backfields. He forced Derrick Henry to be in a committee with Dion Lewis during his Titans days. And so they're always going to have this number 2 guy be at least somewhat involved, and we're definitely seeing that right now with Emmanuel Wilson, a thick, little stout guy, but great long speed. Again, another one of those 4.4-ish 40s, right in that 80th to 90th percentile in speed score. And Marshawn Lloyd, a guy that I really liked in best ball, one I was drafting quite a bit because of this historic committee usage from Matt LaFleur. Where is he? I don't know. He certainly doesn't exist. He's been on the IR to start the year. Liked the player. I thought this was going to be an intriguing stud, but looking like Emmanuel Wilson is going to be that guy instead. So one of those ones, again, if something ever happened to Jacobs, we got 70% of the work now going to Wilson, guy who did handle feature workloads throughout his collegiate career, despite it being at a smaller school. I am a big fan here of Emmanuel Wilson. The last of these stashes, if you want to toss out there, I saw him get dropped in a lot of leagues, is Blake Corum, and I can understand it. He's barely played all year, but we saw some glimpses, a couple little glimmers of hope here with Blake Corum ahead of the bye. We did not see any Ronnie Rivers in week 5 ahead of that bye. We saw Blake Corum get in for 15% of the snaps, 18% of the carries. I get it. That's nothing to write home about. You have Kyron Williams in front of you, the ultimate volume hog, going to be a magnet for touches. Also could put him up to injury risk. We know that he has missed significant time in pretty much every one of his professional seasons here, especially when you're getting that type of workload. And that's why, remember, dating back to the draft, they said we drafted Corum because he reminds us so much of Kyron Williams. If we have to know this injury history is real, we have to have a better backup plan than what we've had. And we don't know yet what Blake Corum will do should he get featured work, but in his work so far this year, last game out, 5 carries, 25 yards, in addition to a catch for 8 yards. Not bad, 5 yards a pop, looking pretty solid. And you get the Raiders this week, maybe that's the right opportunity. The Rams are blowing them out. The post-bye rookie bump you always hear about. Maybe this is a great week to get Corum a little more involved. Wouldn't shock me at all if he comes out and has 10-ish carries, rips a nice 60 yards to get him in the end zone and kind of start finding that groove here with Blake Corum, especially, again, if they are blowing out this Raiders horrendous team here. The last backup I'll mention, just because, again, I love the talent. We're talking with Trey Benson for the Cardinals, a Breece Hall level size speed nightmare. Jonathan Taylor, we don't see guys built this big and then break away with 4.3 speed like Trey Benson. Fortunately, the team clearly isn't that enthused about him, and it doesn't seem like he's really carving himself out a meaningful role. We had James Conner get pretty banged up, which is the situation. You're like, all right, here we go. Wheels up for Trey Benson, and Amari DiMarcado comes in and handles 74% of the snaps, 72% of the routes. Nowhere to be found there for Benson, who then did, in that trailing game script, got 5 carries, put him into 26 yards, looked pretty decent doing it. But I do think a lot of that was the fact that they were already down by 20 points to the Green Bay Packers. Had this been a neutral game script or certainly a lead and James Conner was out, I do think it would be Trey Benson. It's speculative. That's why he's towards the bottom of this list for me, despite having so much upside. But unlike some of these other guys, Blake Corum, I could see being a true 3-down horse, for example. I do think Trey Benson would always be shackled with Amari DiMarcado. But it is worth noting that James Conner did leave that game late with an injury. We know he has missed at least 3 games in literally every single year of his career. So there is going to come a time where this backfield will lean upon some other names. And I do think Trey Benson is still the most exciting guy, despite this discouraging feather in the cap, at least at first glance, in terms of his handcuff upside. Now, that wraps up all of the stash running backs I wanted to talk about, kind of mostly guys that don't have immediate value to you, unless, again, Ty Chandler should be playing ahead of Aaron Jones this week. There are a handful of deep league streamers, guys that are out there in 95% or more leagues that you can even start, and it's some other stashes, though. Just a couple quick names for the deep leaguers that I wanted to toss out. The first one being Isaac Guerendo. Pretty impressive in that extended look. We got 10 carries for 99 yards once Jordan Mason was knocked out of that Thursday night football game. And I think all of you, if you're watching, recognize that 76 of those yards came on that end of game scamper where he blazed right through and could have scored, but unselfishly took the dive so the team could bleed the clock the rest of the way. So ultimately, really 9 carries for 23 yards on the night otherwise, but I don't love doing that whole, you take away his biggest play, because this is a big play guy. He reached the 7th fastest ball carrier speed of the season on that, and that's what Isaac Guerendo is known for. DK Metcalf levels of athleticism in terms of size, speed, nightmare. That's what they talked about Kyle Shanahan when they drafted him, is we just don't see people built like this. We're going to have to figure out how to use him. And so far, per Hayden Winks of Underdog Fantasy, 18 of his 23 carries for Guerendo have been on the outside zone. It's kind of similar to how we see Mike McDaniel use A-Chain. They don't love it up the gut. They want to get this guy in space where he can just find that lane and go and shoot out of the cannon. And we saw, again, that impressive ability in any of the running backs getting meaningful volume. Should Jordan Mason miss this week against the Chiefs here, I want any 49ers running back. That's how beautiful the Kyle Shanahan zone blocking scheme is. You get behind Trent Williams and just let him do his thing. And so maybe it's this week where you get a spot start from Isaac Guerendo, and it's coming against the Chiefs. They've given up by far the fewest points to running back, so it's not a great matchup here. But this is a different type of scheme. It's much harder to defend. And so I would have a lot of interest in stashing Isaac Guerendo should I have Jordan Mason and need that kind of running back situation. Really, if I just need any type of running back startability, he brings a little bit more right now upside than a lot of those stash names we talked about. Another guy that's showing up on a lot of lists here, I'm just adding in the banner here, somehow missed this one. So one other guy that I wanted to bring up out there in 99% of leagues, but likely on your radar after this humongous last week, that is Sean Tucker. Again, 99% available. We thought this week, Bucky Irving's show, here it comes. Oh, wait, the single highest scorer of last week, not at running back, at every single position was Sean Tucker. Pretty absurd. Now, if you pull out garbage time here, I think it was 1 or 2 drives at the end of the game. Irving, according to Dwayne McFarland, still had 70% of the snaps, 40% of the rushes, where Tucker only had 28% at that time. 63% of the routes were going to Bucky Irving, like featured workload. So I'm not panicking necessarily on Bucky Irving. He was the number one running back, yet Tucker racked up 192 yards rushing and receiving and 2 touchdowns on the way to a 34.2 fantasy point explosion. And so after the game, Todd Bowles coming out and saying, absolutely, this can be and should be a 3-headed nightmare type of situation. And I mean, could they actually just get rid of Rachaad White? They should. Look at the way these other 2 backs are performing on a per-touch basis compared to White. It's not even close how much they are outperforming him, overshadowing him. But I just don't think he disappears. And ultimately, this performance might just be bad news for everybody involved. Bucky Irving gets a little bit more cheese nibbled. Rachaad White, how could you ever trust an inefficient guy that's now losing even more of his volume? I still think it's worth a stash, though. Seeing what Tucker could do, he just popped. He looked huge. He's bulldozing people. He had great speed, a solid pass catcher, and yet another one of those guys that you just love to root for. One of those kind of comeback stories here. So Sean Tucker, certainly in the deeper leagues and even in shallower leagues, like a worthwhile bench stash for right now, and pretty playable should Rachaad White miss another game. Now, the last name, and this is for, again, those deep leaguers. Not my league guy. Well, I'm guessing that Audric Estime is out there for you, and I could see him this time next week. Everybody scrambling to pick him up after a Thursday night eruption. Maybe, just maybe. We shall see. We've had Javonte Williams yet again, the 4th time this season, averaged less than 4 yards a pop. 5th time this season, Julian McLaughlin averaged less than 4 yards a pop. Javonte Williams fumbles yet again. And after the game, we have Sean Payton saying, quote, "We are a young team, and I want to see this runner as well. I want to see Estime," when asked about the young players on his offense. And so far, we've only seen Estime for 5-ish snaps on the year. On them, though, he's gotten 4 carries for 27 yards, a nice 6.8 yards a pop. That's nearly double Javonte Williams, who has a 3.6 yards per carry on the season. The Broncos, when you take away the quarterback rushing of Bo Nix, who has about 30 rush yards per game, the Broncos are averaging 77 rushing yards per game from their running backs. That is dead last in the NFL right now. They need a spark. Estime is an absolute bruiser, 240 pounds. It didn't test well with his speed, but then timing-wise, if you look at his production at Notre Dame, was an absolute bell cow, absolute workhorse. Can catch the ball, even though he wasn't really relied upon it so much in college. Would not shock me at all if we saw him just come out and get 15 carries on Thursday night, and suddenly everybody's scrambling to pick him up. A talent I definitely believe in. Reminds me a lot of Ray Davis and what we just saw from this bowling ball, no nonsense. I'm going to come batter you into submission. That's the type of guy Audric Estime is. So I'm a big fan of his game. And I think, again, someone to get ahead of if you have a bench spot, a deep league, one of those 16-man leagues, like, check out Audric Estime. Well worth the spot on your roster. Alrighty, Wolfpack, we're going to move on to wide receivers in just a second, but over 530 of you here live with me. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate you taking your time to tune in. I hope you find it valuable, and if you do, please do consider hitting that heart button on Twitter, the thumbs up button on YouTube, sharing it out to anybody out there. So greatly appreciate it to help us grow, and of course, if you're new in those comments, we're making that climb towards 5K, nearly at 4,200. Would love your help pushing over the edge here and getting us to some of those impressive goals, those big totals. It's been such a fun season watching the climb, watching the growth, all because of you guys helping us out here. So cheers, quick sip of water, and we'll be right into the wide receivers. All righty. Jumping into the Week 7 waiver wire wide receivers, my number one guy is Juju Smith-Schuster, still somehow only 34% rostered. He'd be my second overall waiver wire pickup behind only Tyron Tracy. Now, a tier below Tyron Tracy, I would put him right around, 20% or so FAAB, whereas Tracy more so in that 40 to 50% range. I'd still drop, though, again, quarter of my budget or so to get Juju Smith-Schuster, who I think is going to be an animal moving on the rest of the season. I tweeted this out last week. Couldn't believe the lack of respect that Diet Rashee Rice was getting on the waiver wire, and I still very much believe that. And I do think a big part of that might be because they were on bye, the Chiefs, and so his projections weren't showing up. Well, take advantage of that because this guy should have been the number one waiver wire pickup receiver last week, and I think he yet again is right at the top of waiver wire receivers. 8 targets, 7 catches, 130 yards. The last time we saw him out there, just getting those layup looks, run 4 yards, turn around. Here's the ball from Pat Mahomes. The big thing is Mahomes just trusts this guy. Andy Reid just trusts this guy. All bye week, they raved about how I don't really think we need to trade for anybody because we got Juju. He can come right in here. He knows the system. There's no learning curve, unlike how it would be if we had to trade someone new and get them up to speed. And we saw him, again, hit that ground running with a 24% target share, 32% air yard share. Compare that to 18% targets and 25% for Worthy. Kelsey did lead the way the last time out, but still, very healthy role. And it's not like he's never been productive, Juju, with Mahomes before. 78 catches, 933 yards, and 3 touchdowns just a handful of seasons ago. He's got that veteran savvy to find the soft spots in the zones, hit those layup targets, go in motion. And I just think he's looked eyeball test-wise better than he's looked in years. Was moving really, really well on that. I think it was a Monday night game the last time we saw him out. So I watched nearly every snap of it. And this looked like Juju from the Steelers again. And now he has Mahomes throwing to him and might be the number one vein of that passing game. Maybe behind Travis Kelce, sure, but probably the number one receiver, given how much more competent he is over the middle, can take the big hits, can move the chains. I'm a huge fan of Juju Smith-Schuster. I cannot believe he's out there in nearly 70% of leagues. Now, you miss on Juju, you may then be asking yourself, which Packer wide receiver should I prioritize? A lot of you, not in my leagues, but actually go double check because I'm in a lot of competitive leagues and I've seen Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs dropped in multiple leagues. Which one do you prioritize, though? Should they both be staring you at the face and you can only pick one of them up? Do you go Romeo Doubs, the 35% rostered guy, or Christian Watson at 42%? Well, let's talk about both these guys and then give you the ultimate choice. Doubs, as always, led the team with 86% of the routes. Any game he's been active this year, he's led the way in route share. That's also the trend of last year's team as well. But we're also seeing more of these big game explosions from Romeo Doubs. For a while early in his career, he was kind of that quote-unquote sacrificial X, just running routes, eating time on the field, a good blocker, but not really doing a ton with his fantasy production. Well, 49 yards and 2 touchdowns later in his Week 6 return to the lineup on 3 catches. Really, really solid. And again, led the way with field time, 86% of the routes. Did have a 13% target share, which Jaden Reed led the way, 19% of the targets. But we also had Christian Watson also seeing 13% of the targets as well. And he did a lot of work with his too. 3 catches, 68 yards, and a score. A nice deep bomb, a 44-yard grab. And Wicks out there now with a shoulder injury. Depends on what he ends up being labeled as. Right now, they say day-to-day. Should he miss time, though, that really opens up and condenses this target tree. It's going to be tough to trust either of these guys if Wicks is in. I know all of them play ahead of him, but Wicks, when he mixes in for 30% of the snaps or so, that really eats into Watson. That's why out of Watson and Doubs, I would definitely prioritize Doubs myself. You know, every single week he's going to man that X receiver spot, be out there for 80% of the routes, and we're seeing these fantasy splashes. Even in the playoffs last year, when they needed someone to step up the most, it was Doubs who had that humongous game against the Cowboys. And so of these guys, I do think Doubs, despite the upside of Watson, we saw it as a rookie. This guy was the number 3 wide receiver from like week 11 to week 15. He had a massive run with Aaron Rodgers there. So explosive, can attack you deep, can get it after the catch. There's a lot to love about Watson. If you told me both these guys were going to play equal routes rest of the year, yeah, I'd prioritize Watson. He is just the superior talent, the higher upside guy. And if it's just pure stashing for you, maybe you do go with Watson because there is a little bit of a higher ceiling, but I still lean with Doubs myself, given this consistent role in a top 5 passing attack in the NFL. I mean, this offense is just deadly. Jordan Love is lights out. And you look at the rest of the schedule until they're bye. You got Houston, a top 10 matchup, Jacksonville, the best possible matchup, and then Detroit, a top 3 matchup. 3 straight green zone matchups heading into the bye. So if Wicks misses any of the time, and even if not, I think Doubs is a guy you could certainly plug into your lineup and help you fill those bye weeks. As a Watson, again, if you do have to go for this one instead, I still think there's going to be some value to Christian Watson as well. But I do prioritize, again, I'd go Romeo Doubs over Watson myself, but either of these guys would be my number 2 and 3 wide receiver pickups of week 7 behind only Juju Smith-Schuster. Now, should you miss on those guys, or you're in a way more competitive league, Wolf, none of them are available in my league. All right, well, 8% Demario Douglas. I bet you he's out there in at least a handful of your leagues out there. He is right around my fringe top 10 pickups of the week, but very impressive peripherals here in week 7. And I think the role could only grow. Plus, week 7 upside's really high here for Demario Douglas. Let's dive into it. 29% target share this last week, leading the Patriots with 32% targets per route run as well. So on 9 targets, that's his third time in the last 4 weeks seeing exactly 9 targets, a nice and steady roll. 18.2 half PPR fantasy points with a 37% air yard share, thanks to an 8.8 average depth of target. That's the big rub here. That's why I am actually far more excited about Demario Douglas than I typically get about this guy. Normally, Zadok's right around 3 or 4, kind of that Wan'Dale Robinson catching the ball, and I'm going down. No, we saw more deep game unlocked with Drake Maye forcing the ball downfield to Demario Douglas, who did a lot of quality stuff with his work. And now, getting a more vertical roll. The one rub here, too, is he's only out there for 67% of the routes. And that's kind of like, what are we doing there? This guy is clearly your best weapon. And after the game, we did have Gerard Mayo come out and say, Demario Douglas, Pop Douglas is our go-to guy. We also do trust as well, ultimately, those, he said, Kayshawn Boutte, and it wasn't Jalen Polk, the other guy that he trusted. So he did cite Demario Douglas as the one that he wants to ride moving forward. And you get the Jags coming up this week. Most fantasy points allowed to receivers by a mile, just like we talked about with Drake Maye, why we think he is a great rip him right out of the package and start him from your waiver wire pickup day. I think Demario Douglas is in for a great game as well. Plus 14.5 schedule adjusted fantasy points to wide receivers are the Jags allowing. Yes, their wide receivers put up nearly over 2 touchdowns worth of points more when they face the Jags here. And so I expect a huge game in London for Drake Maye, for Demario Douglas, his number one weapon there. A guy I would be prioritizing should I miss on the Packers guys or Juju Smith-Schuster. The rest of these receivers fall a nice tier or two below those other pickups, but still worth shouting out. A guy like Xavier Legette, who had that huge week 4. We all saw 24% target share, 88% of the routes, 19.6 fantasy points. Very impressive day. Week 5 comes and he gets a shoulder injury. It's against Chicago, who's locking down every receiver. But then right back to a pretty solid day here in week 6 with 3 catches, 23 yards, and a touchdown. Nothing huge, but still getting in the end zone. You get to see the horse gallop celebration. And who's better to root for than Xavier Legette? What a fun player that this man is. Ultimately played over 75% of the routes here, right back in that every down roll. Thing with him, though, is Adam Thielen could be coming back at some point. You still think this team should be committed to their young talent here, figuring out what they have. Yet Deontay Johnson trade rumors as well. Who knows what will happen, but we know Dave Canales does love this guy. And then we wrap up receivers with 2 more names, Rashad Bateman and Michael Wilson. Which one should you prefer, whether you need a streamer or more of a stash? Let's dive in to first Michael Wilson here. Finds the end zone in that loss, and good thing he did, because otherwise it was a forgettable day. 4 targets, 2 catches, 21 yards, but does get that touchdown. And now in his last 4 weeks, he's got 9 or more half PPR points in 3 of his 4 games. Very, very solid here. And we got Marvin Harrison also suffering that concussion. We'll see whether he's sidelined. It's Monday night, so you kind of have to wait it out and see. But that's what's kind of the tricky part here with Michael Wilson, because if Marvin Harrison plays, it's going to be tough to trust him. And you look at his schedule, the Chargers, 27th in points allowed. Miami, 30th in points allowed. Chicago, 28th. And then the Jets, 29th. The next 4 games, all bottom 5 matchups here for Michael Wilson. So it is tough to love this guy heading into this next stretch. Meanwhile, Rashad Bateman, who's not really on any of these lists, nobody's really talking about him. He also has 9 or more points in 3 of his last 4 games. But the schedule is much juicier here for Rashad Bateman. Tampa Bay, 7th most points. Cleveland, 9th most points coming up in their next 2 battles here. Coming off a solid 4-catch, 70-yard day here for Rashad Bateman. His last game out, season high in yardage. Has 2 touchdowns across his last 4 weeks as well. Not bad production here from Rashad Bateman. We all know, the average separation score according to fantasy points, has always been high for Rashad Bateman. Yeah, it's tricky because it's clear Zay Flowers is by far the number 1 here. Now we got Mark Andrews reemerging a little bit. So it's going to be tough to trust Bateman, who has only seen 4, 1, 8, and 4 targets. But I do think over these next couple of weeks, if I had to choose between Wilson and Bateman, plug somebody into my lineup, I do prefer playing the matchups here with Rashad Bateman myself. Alrighty, Wolfpack, that wraps up the wide receiver waiver wire additions. We have 2 tight ends for you, and then we'll hit our defensive streamers and then on to the mailbag. Keep those questions coming on in. It is so greatly appreciated. Now we're approaching nearly 630 of you here with us. Another call for you. If you haven't already, please consider hitting that thumbs up button, the like on Twitter, the shares, the retweets. I know I ask it a lot, but that's because it is so greatly helpful to us to continue to grow and get the brand out there to more people. It's just a quick click for us, but it really does go such a long way. So please do consider that for us, guys. All righty, we are now moving to the tight end position. So let's dive in to my favorite waiver wire pickup at the tight end position for week 7 is Hunter Henry, continuing that Patriots theme. Maybe I'm drinking the Kool-Aid a little too much as a Patriots fan, but I loved what I saw out of Drake Maye. So much more competency. Definitely had a lot of pressure, but he was moving so well in the pocket. Some of those deep throws were truly, you have yourself an NFL caliber quarterback finally. We had not seen any of that from Jacoby Brissett to start the year, and Hunter Henry was another one in addition to Demario Douglas who really benefited. 41 yards and a touchdown on 3 catches. His 5 targets were second behind only Pop Douglas here, but Drake Maye can consistently average right around that. He put up 243 yards this game. That's well above the NFL average right now with passing down across the league. And coming in now against the Jags, another one of those spots that he could easily smash. We've already had a handful of big games here from Hunter Henry on the season, and actually dating back the last 3 years, he only trails like George Kittle and Travis Kelce in terms of 15-plus point games at tight. Like, it's a crazy stat, and that's how the Fantasy Point cited that on their podcast earlier. And there's spike week potential, and they were citing it more so for DFS purposes. But again, at tight end, where everyone's so desperate, Hunter Henry's proving to have as high of a ceiling as really anyone in the league. And so I really like going to Hunter Henry against the Jags this week, and just in general for my tight end, should I need one. Comparatively, if you need a safer floor, I guess you get it from Kate Auden. You guys know at this point, we call them you ate something. It's that kind of, you come home, you're starving, you find a bag of chips, you chug yourself a beer, and then you just go to bed with a full stomach that doesn't feel good, but you got something out of it. That's Kate Auden, the fantasy experience. You're never getting much. 6.2, 8.2, 5.9, and 8.5 his last 2 games. But ultimately, that's something. A tight end where a lot of people are just going in with zeros each and every week. Kate Auden's going to get you 6-ish. And that's worth something out there. I do prefer Hunter Henry, given that I'd much rather have my tight end get me 20 and smash my opponent into smithereens. And I'll eat the occasional 2 to 3 point dud for a potential ceiling like that. But hey, if you want to play it safer, you want to eat something, Kate Auden did catch a touchdown this last week, did see 6 targets, 8, 9, 4, and 6 targets. Top 5 in the position across his last 4 games in terms of a volume perspective. All righty, that wraps up the tight ends. Let's move on into the defensive streamers. My top defensive streamers for week 7. I'm going to start it off with the Indianapolis Colts, and I've gone this well before. Hasn't always consistently worked out this year, especially these last 2 weeks. 0 and 3 points. Wolf, why would I ever trust this team again? And that was a decent matchups against Jacksonville and Tennessee. Yet you look at what the Colts have done at home. They have been significantly better. That's going to be a trend with the next defense we talk about as well. 11 and 8 fantasy points in their last 2 home games did the Colts rack up, including 4 sacks. Again, it's not causation. I get it. But teams do consistently have those kind of bumps in their home ground, their home turf here. And who's coming for them? But the Tyler Huntley-led Dolphins. A phenomenal matchup here. 3rd in points allowed to defenses. 10-plus points surrendered in 4 straight games had the Miami to their fantasy defenses. Double digits. That's very rare to have that steady of production from your defensive position, including both of Huntley's starts. Teams have put up over 10 or more points, and the Dolphins have not topped 15 points in 3 straight weeks. They've allowed 2 or more sacks in every single game, 3.2 sacks on the season. That's what the Colts can do well when they are fully healthy. It's not a great defense. They give up big plays in the passing game. Maybe Tyreek gets shaken free in this game, but ultimately, I like the Colts as an opportunistic defense at home that's played really well. Just as good at home are the Saints. in the Superdome, they've put up 14, 11, and 9 fantasy points. All were top 12 games for the fantasy defense position, and they have averaged 9 points per game on the season. They're top 12 in that metric as well. And I get it. Last week, 51 points allowed against the Bucks, but they still had 3 picks to the Saints defense. They still had a touchdown. They still put up 9 fantasy points. That's the thing with fantasy defenses. You see these 51-point data say this team could never be good for me, and yet they still had a solid game. And now you got Bo Nix. I can't imagine a world where Bo Nix puts up 51 points on Thursday Night Football. I can't imagine a world where Bo Nix puts up 20 points on Thursday Night Football coming into the Superdome. You got, again, this great setup for turnovers here. Bo Nix, he hasn't been sacked a whole lot. He's been very mobile in the pocket, but he has been careless with the ball, with their top 7 right now in interceptions. They mustered up 16 points against a good Chargers defense, but that almost all came in the fourth quarter. They were scoreless through 3 periods and ultimately only had 100 yards entering the fourth quarter. So they really did put it together at the end of the game there. But, man, they're not good. This is not a good team. They're giving up plenty of sacks. They're allowing nearly 7 points per game to fantasy defenses. I think the Saints at home on Thursday night on that short week can definitely have themselves a solid effort. The last defensive streamer I will toss out there are the Cincinnati Bengals, 18% rostered. They've been a laughingstock of a defense this entire year, but they're coming off a 10-point fantasy day. They were defensive 10 on the week as well. They only allowed 7 points to the Giants, 2 sacks, 1 interception. But we're now getting them against Cleveland, who has not scored 20 points all year, has not amassed 300 yards of offense in any of their 6 games. They've been below 250 yards of offense in 5 of those 6 games. 13.5 points per game is only better than Miami, giving up the 5th most points to defenses, primarily due to an insane 31 sacks allowed, by far the most in the league. They got both tackles back this last week, and they still gave up 5 sacks on the day because Deshaun Watson holds the ball for so long. It's ridiculous he's not getting benched. I don't understand it. Makes no sense, but I will continue to use defenses, even pathetic ones like the Bengals, against him. They've given up 9 fantasy points to 5 of the 6 teams that hit faced, at least 9 fantasy points, multiple double-digit days as well. So to me, the Bengals are feeling like a nice, safe, locked-in defense against this horrible Browns team. I will toss out there that the Bills apparently on Sleeper are also only they're 49% rostered on Sleeper. They're 75% on Yahoo, so I didn't think to include them. But if you're on Sleeper or the Bills are somehow lingering out there, they do get the Titans pick 6 machine, Will Levis on the other side, just the most embarrassing quarterback besides Deshaun Watson in the NFL right now. So I want to toss out the Bills as a potential ad as well. Alrighty, Wolfpack, that does wrap up all the pickups that I will shout out there for you. It is now on to all of your questions, but another call out with 650 of you here. That heart button on Twitter, the thumbs up on YouTube, those little likes, the shares, the retweet button, it really does continue to help us grow, Wolfpack. So if you appreciate me answering your questions, I love doing it. I love being here. Please do consider that small little act of gratitude here to keep the lights on here at RSJ. Full PPR. Add Doubs or Watson and drop Coleman. I could drop Coleman at this point, especially with Amari Cooper arriving. And like I said, I do prefer Doubs as the safer, going to be on the field no matter who is healthy, who's out there type of guy. Watson does have his upside too, probably the higher ceiling guy if you're looking for just a pure bench stash, but I do lean here with Doubs myself. Dearness Johnson, I see that in a deep league, Terby. I didn't really give it much thought, but are the rumblings that maybe Travis Etienne's up for the trade block. Either way, maybe Etienne's hurt. We saw him start to mix in. I've always been a fan of Dearness Johnson. I still think all the other guys I listed, and there was a lot there, including even Audric Estime, only 2% roster. Like, I'd go to any of those guys ahead of Dearness myself, but I think he's a fine name to be tossing out there, Turby. Sure. What up, Mike Clay? Good to see you again, brother. I know I miss seeing you at the streams. I get it on the West Coast. Hey, we do have a Bruce, my man Brucey K, Dookie B. He shows up on the West Coast. No excuses. Play like a champion. But I get it. It's tough to wake up at 5 a.m. for a fantasy football stream. But I'm still glad to see you here on these night ones as well, Mike Clay. Hope the season's going well for you, brother. Khalil Shakir, rest of season outlook. I'm still kind of diving in. I wanted to cover it kind of tonight on the stream, but I haven't had enough time to truly research Amari Cooper, Devontae Adams, and what I think of this. But my gut says, He's been such a great chain mover, great ball player all year here for Josh Allen. I don't think that just disappears. I do think Amari Cooper is very capable of being their number one and taking over the alpha role. And so I think Khalil Shakir does take a little step back in volume, but he's been so efficient and so reliable that I don't think he disappears by any means. I certainly would not cut him. I'd like to see how it all plays out. And while we get Cooper getting acclimated, yeah, I think Shakir's going to still be like a 1A, 1B for at least a couple weeks. But I do really believe Cooper is going to explode here in general with the Bills. Would you rather have Shakir, Juju, or Demario Douglas? I think I'd rather have Juju off this list. Shakir, if Cooper wasn't there, it would be Shakir. I wouldn't even think twice. I still have to work my way through it mentally. Like, how bad do I ding Shakir rest of the season? But I do think Juju is the guy my gut kind of leans towards in this question, Mike Clay. Stream Hunter Henry or Dalton Schultz? I do prefer Hunter Henry. Everyone keeps talking about, Dalton Schultz. No, Diego Collins, look at all the volume. And look at all the production. Nothing is there. Give me Hunter Henry in a good match against the Jags with Drake May rolling my man Charlie. Would you drop Shakir or Leggett? I would drop Leggett before Shakir for Juju. Juju is my number one wide receiver pickup this week, and I would keep Shakir over the other guys. King Wolf, I love these waiver wire lives. It helps so much. 5-1. Let's go, Coach Zeke. That's why we do it, to make sure the good folks like you are getting the help they need. I'm glad to hear that you're killing it this season, Coach. And would you trade Downs or Doubs for Tracy? Yes, I would lean to trade Doubs first. And if I had to trade Downs, I would. Only because if you were giving him to me, Flacco was the quarterback the rest of the year, then no way. Then Downs is my guy. He's a top 20 wide receiver anytime Flacco's in there. But I don't think you can even trust him at all. You can't even put him in your lineup when Richardson's there. Meanwhile, Tracy might be taken over as that featured running back. Huge fan. So, yeah, I'm definitely into Tracy for sure. And then trade Lockett for Algier. It depends on what you need, Coach. But, yeah, I think if it's just a pure bench stash, then Lockett's not making it in your lineup, not bringing you any value, then Algier certainly is a bench stash, brings way more upside to the roster. So I think I like both these running backs in a vacuum more. But, of course, team needs do play a role. Would you drop Javonte to pick up one of Algier, Davis, Vidal? May need to start whoever I pick up if Jonathan Taylor doesn't go. That having to start one makes it trickier because Javonte is still right now getting the volume. He's not doing anything with it. But I just don't know that you can trust any of these three more than Javonte on a starting basis. If it was just literally who's on my bench, who brings more upside, like Algier is way better than Javonte for just a pure stash and in general, like what his ceiling could be. I'm still not opposed to cutting Javonte, though. I do, like I said, think Estime takes over that backfield this week. So I probably, gun to my head, would drop Javonte for Algier. I just don't think he needs to be held. AR Cannabis, man, Bigsby was horrible. And the worst part about it was, like, it's the London game. So there's no turning it off. It's not like red zone can save your eyes. You just had to grin and bear it. And I think a lot of it was less about Bigsby and more about the Jags being so disgusting to watch. But that's the risk, I guess, that I didn't account for as much, as that the Jags could be just that bad. That game flow doesn't work for Bigsby. The offense can't get going. There's no scoring opportunities. It's so tricky because, I mean, the dude had 25 points just 2 weeks ago, but I thought he could overcome his horrible surroundings. It did not look so this last week, which does make Bigsby a whole lot trickier to trust. That was brutal. I know a lot of people ask about like Bigsby versus Tyrone Tracy, and thankfully I was on the right side of that, but I know on Sunday I did recommend Bigsby to a fair amount of folks, and he sucked. The Jags sucked more than him, but yeah, he wasn't good either. At least it wasn't Etienne, though, right? KJ Frederick, better week 7 tight end play. K-Dot and Hunter Henry or Dalton Schultz? I like Hunter Henry myself, as we were talking about there for all those reasons earlier, KJ Frederick. Lastly, would you rather have Corum Vidal or Jay Wright? I think I lean Jay Wright here, Zeke. They're all great handcuff stashes, so trust your gut. And I do think Vidal, I think one of them is going to be most likely to hit at some point. I think Vidal plays behind the most injury-prone guy, J.K. Dobbins, but Wright excites me the most. If we get Tua back, we've seen what this Mike McDaniel run game looks like, and it is great. Eric, my man, great to see you coming on in here. Good stuff. We'll have a ton of questions for you Thursday, Sunday. I love to see it. Keep fighting the good fight out there in the classroom, my man. Principa Investia. Drop Kirk for Algier. Here's the thing with Kirk, though. I don't know if it's Kirk Cousins or Christian Kirk. I'm guessing you mean Christian Kirk. There's a lot of rumblings he could get traded, and there's a chance he could get traded to the Chiefs. Well, as much as I like Juju, Christian Kirk would be Juju on steroids for the Chiefs. So it's similar. I was about to drop Calvin Ridley like this today. I couldn't wait. I was counting down the minutes, and I was like, what if he gets traded? What if Hopkins gets traded and they start Mason Rudolph? What if, there's scenarios where these veterans can really come into some big value. Look no further than Amari Cooper, who I know no one was going to drop, but like he just went from a low-end wide receiver 2 that you don't really want in your lineup to maybe a top 7 wide receiver. Kirk could have that type of turnaround, so I'm kind of holding these guys. I probably would. And you still won by 12. Hey, glad to hear that AR candidates. That makes me feel a lot better about Bigsby. You still survived. Yeah, it is an early wake-up for sure, says Robert Moreno. Yep. Would you drop Raheem Mostert or Doubs for Myers, Demario Douglas, Dontavian Wicks, Algier, or Warren? I would prioritize Myers. I would drop Doubs, and I don't know if I drop Mostert for any of these guys. I could see it. If you don't use Mostert, I think Algier is better served on your bench. It did look like Mostert, though, with Achane knocked out, had some upside last week. So I'd probably carry him, but I would certainly get Jacoby Myers over any of these guys with no Devontae Adams now. And then I think I lean Algier as a higher bench stash, but Mostert if you kind of need to use one. Both Amari and Devontae Adams, you should be hyped. A big day for you, Giuseppe Russo. Cap for life. What up, bro? Got offered Devontae Smith for Devontae Adams. Do I pull the trigger? I'd probably hang with Adams and see what happens with Aaron Rodgers here, back with his boy. Like that could just be right back to the magic we came to know and love for a long time. Do I deal Schultz, Achane, and Darnold for Burrow and Madison? Nah, I don't think so. I think Achane, there's a world where Tua comes back, which seems likely, and we get Achane going bananas, down the stretch run. Like of any of these guys, I could see like, oh, you really need this guy on your team for the stretch. I do lean Achane. I mean, Burrow could be that guy too, but I just don't think Madison. Yeah, it's close though, but I think Achane would be tough. Zay Flowers for my Achane. I could see that deal if you needed the receiver bad. Sure. Do you think Amari Cooper being traded to Buffalo? I think it definitely improves. It will. And thank you for those very nice comments you wrote. I meant to write back to you, and I will on the last YouTube stream. You wrote some really nice stuff, and I greatly appreciate those kind words. It means a lot. It keeps the engine churning over here for sure when you see some kind words like that, Will. But yes, I do think this improves his outlook. How could it not, right? Go from Deshaun Watson, maybe the worst quarterback in the league, to Josh Allen, one of the best. Great deep ball slinger. Yeah, I think this is going to be huge. There's a gaping number one need there for the Bills. So, yeah, I think Amari Cooper has a rocket arrow for the rest of the season going direct to his name. Happy early Groundhog Day. What is the early Groundhog Day, Charlie? I've heard somebody say that. Like, is there like a pop-out day today or something like that? I don't you're saying you're using the movie quote. Like somebody else was saying something about that too earlier today. Vikings trade for Cam Akers again. Yep. Still holding Chandler, but yeah, that's the thing though. The Chandler, I guess I should have mentioned that it just happened. And Frazier coming in and asking the same question. I wasn't even weighing that. I think it happened right as I was going live and I saw it, but I didn't even think twice. Yeah, I think it has to impact how you view Chandler. I'd certainly rather have the doll. I already had him higher, but like clearly the separation is even bigger now. Obviously, prioritizing Ray Davis, Jalen Wright, of course, if Tyron Tracy, someone out there for you, Algier, way more. But yeah, I think this has to impact Ty Chandler. It makes it far less likely he becomes that 80% guy again. What do you make of Dontavian Wicks? I believe is the most hyped waiver wire pickup of all the time by experts. Yeah, it sucks. I think you can definitely cut him. But again, it's one of those things like he got hurt early last game. The game before, he had 7 targets and 3, deep balls sailed over his head. I still think the guy has a lot of talent, but butterfingers are butterfingers. A lot of bad drops, then gets injured. I definitely think he's cuttable, but I don't think that the experts, and myself included, I was into Dontavian Wicks. When he's been out there, he's made huge plays and he's demanded targets. And so a guy that has playmaking ability and the ability to command the ball goes his way. Like that I will always have eyes for. And I wouldn't surprise me if, again, Watson gets hurt and at some point Wicks reemerges as a big player down the stretch. But yeah, for now, I don't think he needs to be rostered. Will Giuseppe have Mason? Would you drop Mostert for Garendo? I don't think so. Why are you repeating your questions, Giuseppe? You probably got a little glitch or something there. Flex question: Chase Brown or Kareem Hunt? I go Kareem Hunt. Robert, he really took over that backfield. And I love Chase Brown. He's taking over the backfield, but Kareem has taken over the backfield. Chase Brown is still working towards his takeover at this point. All righty. Plowing on forward. Oh, we got a good mailbag here. So I'm probably going to go rapid fire for these last few because I do got to get out of here in like 10 minutes. I've had the great mailbag, though, Wolfpack. Thank you so much. So awesome to have so many of you here asking amazing questions. One last call for that thumbs up button to help your boy continue to get out to more people with over 700 of you here. I'd love to hit 1,000 on one of these waiver streams. I do think, again, it's our best content live stream-wise. I love answering your questions and whatnot, but this is the content that it's like the trench work, the line work that you really got to get in there and dig in. And I would love to get more and more people here. So that heart button, the retweet button, the thumbs up button, all of it would be greatly appreciated. All right. I would go Hunter Henry over Thielen myself. Well, Ethan, you're the man. Thank you so much for your kind words. Would you trade Lamb for King Henry? Depends on your team needs, Quincy Davis, but they are in the same tier. Absolutely. You could consider that trade. Drop Wicks for Pop Douglas? I would. Yeah, I know it sucks. And exactly, sunken cost fallacy. You know, it blows. You took the stab. Things didn't pan out. And I still think there's another world where it would have panned out. But yeah, I think it needed this context. Thanks, Wolf. Hey, hell yeah, Bulldog. Glad you're here. Thank you. I have Dobbins. Should I drop Jalen Warren for Vidal? That gives you a nice insurance policy, but I do agree, like, what happens with Russ. And also, like, Jalen Warren himself is a great handcuff, too. Najee finally has best game of the year. Gun to my head, who would I rather have on my team? Probably Vidal, but I can definitely see waiting a week and see what happens with Russ. Hold or drop Tolbert for Demario Douglas rest of the season stash. I would rather have Demario than Tolbert at this point, Coach Zeke. Those Cowboys look horrible. Half PPR King Retros. Start one. Tony Pollard, Chuba Hubbard, or J.K. Dobbins. With Tajay Spears likely out, I think I'm leaning Pollard there, but you have a great running back crew. My God. Who to start? I have Tank, Bigsby, Travis, Etienne. I would go Bigsby still. Etienne seems banged up. Amari or Devontae. As is, rest of the season or starter, depends. I would say this week I'd probably lean Devontae without remembering his matchup right off the top of my head. Then we have Metcalf, Devontae Smith, or Evans. I'm going to quickly rip through these guys. I don't know these ones quite as well. Thursday, 6:30 is when I'll really have updated the rankings, dug into the matchups, looked at all that stuff. So I'll have a better feel for this King Retros, but just to rapid fire through them, I'm going to say Metcalf at first. Mike Evans against Baltimore. As long as he's healthy, I'm going to go Mike Evans, and they're going to need him for those big plays against a defense giving up a ton of them. Do you drop Lazard, Braylon Allen, or Justice Hill for Demario Douglas, Algier, or Bateman? I would drop Justice Hill for Algier. I would drop Lazard for Douglas. Yes, I would keep Braylon Allen. I would not drop Jordan Addison, but I can't believe Tank Dell's out there. So there's got to be like drop your kicker for now. Something, King Retros. We should not have Tank Dell out there. That Persian guy. How would you rank Garrett Wilson, Debo, Deontay for PPR rest of the season? I'll be updating my rest of the season big board. So check that out over at rotostreetjournal.com. My guess is going to be Debo, Deontay, then Garrett. And yeah, I would trade Garrett Wilson for Nico Collins. I'm worried about the volume here at this point. Would you drop Shakir for Juju or Watson? I would probably drop him for Juju myself. But it's close. And I would rather have is Surtain not playing? That's a good question, Tyler. We'll track that one for Thursday and see what happens. If that's the movie, that's what I kind of figured what you would go with, Charlie. Indeed. Patrick Bird, drop Wicks for Pop Douglas. Oh, you were asking that one on Twitter, and I said, yeah, sunken cost fallacy. But yeah, and as Giuseppe reminds, like and share, sub people. Definitely would love some new subs as we try to climb over to that 5K. Buff D versus 10 or Atlanta D. I would go Buffalo D Tunes. Would you drop Shakir for Pop Douglas, Juju, or Watson? I would drop him for Juju myself, Tyler Sperry. And if Dobbins goes down, do you trust Vidal or Gus once Gus is healthy? I would definitely say Vidal. Gus looked literally like a mulch pile so far this year. I want nothing to do with him. He is a ball of mud just rolling his shittiness all over the field. So, yeah, that means I want Vidal instead. Much more exciting. Well, that wraps up all the mailbag, all your questions. Thank you again so much for being here. on that Tuesday night, getting those waivers ready. One last call for that thumbs up button on your way out would be so greatly appreciated. Thanks again. Check out all of our waiver wire content, all my rest of season rankings, weekly rankings at rotostreetjournal.com, where we breed and feed you fantasy wolves. Hit that sub, hit that like, hit the retweet, hit the thumbs up, all the good stuff. Thanks again, Wolfpack. Really appreciate you being here. In a world full of fantasy sheep, guys, be that wolf. Later.